What we're doing here is very much an introduction session, and the idea of today's webcast is that we'll get everyone familiar with the concepts of what Map and Mapguide and mobile can do, and then we'll ask what we should do for the next webcast, and it'll be totally governed by the feedback we get. So this is our rough agenda here. Now I always differentiate the old GIS from Autodesk and the new GIS, which we'll explain throughout this, and we'll do a bit about Mapguide and we'll do a small bit about mobile at the end. So we won't go into detail on any of these in too much, but we'll just do enough to get the concepts across. So let's just go straight into it. So CAD and GIS the old way. Now the idea here is that let's just go into AutoCAD here and illustrate. I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to make a brand new drawing. I'll just use a standard AutoCAD template. And the classic example here is that AutoCAD is an evolution of a drafting board in many ways. So we've got great tools for doing line work and for dimensioning lines and that kind of business, but the only information we have to tell us what that line represents is a layer name. So the layer might be sewer or it might be something else, but we don't really have information about attributes. So what we want to do here is go to annotate and define some object data. Now actually I haven't used this ribbon for this stuff just yet, so I'm going to cheat a little bit and I'm going to go to insert. I'm actually going to erase these first of all. I'm going to insert, I'm going to go to map import, and I'm going to import an SDF file. Now this import feature allows us to import GIS data like Esri, MapInfo, and the usual suspects. So I'm going to import this SDF file. I'm going to press OK, and many of you will have seen this dialog box already, and usually you just press OK here. You might tick that button for the import polygons as polylines and leave it at that. The button everyone misses is the data button. So when you press this button here, you can say create object data, which we'll explain in a second. I can now press select fields. So my GIS file got attributes of the last sale price for these parcels, the year it was built, the resident's name, all this valuable information. So by ticking this option, when I press OK and OK and OK again, what's going to happen, let me just give your screens a few seconds to catch up. The geometry is going to come in, but as well as the geometry, if I zoom in here and select one of these parcels, so I've just grabbed a random one here, I'll do Control 1 for properties. Now the interesting part here is that as well as my general geometry and everything else, I have now got information about all these parcels. So we've basically taken AutoCAD to a level above where it was, where it's got all this information available. Now we can do quite a few clever things with this. We can display this information as text. It's kind of like a dynamic block, which we won't go into now. We can come back sometime and do that. Or we can do queries based on the data. So it's quite useful in itself. The limitation is that we've had to convert it into AutoCAD format. Now let me just do one thing first of all. Let me pick this one I just took a while ago, and let me change the name here to Shown to Me. And we'll say OK to that. I will take this and stretch it so it's very obvious where it is. What I'm now going to do is export that. So if I go to Map Import, I've got to find my Output tab, and hopefully I will see a map export. So I want to export as an SDF file. I'll change it. I'll export it as an Esri shape file. I'll put this on my desktop and I'll call it modified. I could overwrite my previous file quite easily. So I'm going to say we are going to, actually I won't do an SDF, I won't do a shape file, I will do a map info file, a tab file. I'll call this modified, we press OK. I'll say select everything, and data. The important button when you're exporting is to tell the software to pick the object data and tick everything on. Now, one of the tricks which we'll show in future webcasts is that as you're exporting this, you can also include attributes for AutoCAD parameters like elevation. So GIS packages in general don't display contours at correct elevations. They store it as an attribute. By clicking this button, you can include it. So you press OK and OK to all this. So it exports all these entities. When I re-import, that modified parcel will have the name shown to me on it. Now, I won't bother importing it. Just take my word for it, or try it yourselves by all means. When we do our dedicated webcast on object data, we'll go through it in more detail. So let me just, I'll allow this process to finish, and then we'll come back. Now, that gives you quite a few flexible options, but the problem is that if my source data changes, I'm obliged to erase all my geometry in AutoCAD and re-import from scratch, which is a bit of a clunky process. So what we're going to move towards is what we call the next generation of map stuff, the FDO business. So let me just allow this to finish. It's very close. And we'll do one more thing and move on to the FDOs. Now, a classic scenario which we come across all the time is that somebody has received contours from a GIS department, and when they open the drawing file, the contours are all at elevation 0. I've come across this in many different places. So let me just show you what I mean here. I've got a file here. So we have contours by object data. So when I open this file up, if I pick any one of these contours and go to my properties, the elevation is shown as an attribute, but when you look at the actual properties of the geometry, the physical elevation is 0. So if you're planning on using this to build a DTM, it's not much good to you. So the trick here is as follows. You don't open the drawing directly. You start a new drawing, which we'll use the AutoCAD template for again. You bring up the map workspace. There is an icon for this. I type in MAPW space and that comes up for me. And what I do is go to my Explorer tab, pick my drawing, and I drag it over. So I pick my contours by object data and I'll drag this over here. Now what we're about to do now is a query. Now again, a query can be a full webcast by itself. It's a very powerful tool. Essentially, it's like an XREF, only I can tell the query only bring in certain types. So I could say only bring in a certain layer name, or only bring in a certain object type. So just take in lines or circles or whatever, and you can do all kinds of clever things with those for recovering corrupted drawings and everything else. In this case, we're going to say location all. That just brings in everything. And we'll go to draw mode. What we'll also do, we'll press alter properties. So on the alter properties, I'm interested in changing the elevation, and I want to change the elevation based on an expression. So I press expression here. So my expression is going to be based on the object data attributes, and the one I want is the elevation attribute. So this process is where I tell the software, take the physical elevation of 0 and replace it with that attribute I just specified. Now a very common mistake, which I often make myself, is to forget to press the add button on the bottom left here. So I've done it this time, so I should be good. I press OK and I execute my query. Now when I zoom extents and pick one of these contours and go to my properties, we can see the elevation is a correct value. And if I orbit, I'll just do this very quickly. Now your screens may struggle to keep pace with this, but I'll very quickly do an orbit here, and you will see that the contours are definitely drawn in space. So you can do all kinds of groovy things with these. So that is the old map. Now, as you can see, it has got some very useful functions on it. So let's just move back to the PowerPoint. One description of it is AutoCAD on steroids. I've only shown you the tip of the iceberg. There are loads of groovy things that you can do on this which AutoCAD can't do. So the AutoCAD on steroids, it's a complement, but it's also a limitation, because AutoCAD is a static interface, and if my data sources change, so if someone changes the Esri shapefile or the map, I have to re-import. So the next one we're going to look at is Cad GIS by the new way. Now this PowerPoint's got some animations on it, so it might be a little bit slow, so I'll try to keep nice and slow through this one. The idea here is that the data is stored outside of your drawing. So let me show you what I mean. This example, you've got an Oracle database which is showing you the parcel outlines, or the lot outlines. A separate file completely, an SDF file, is showing you the utilities. So these show up here. Then the actual names of the parcels and who owns what, that's in an SQL server. And the zoning designations, in this case, they're storing it on an Esri ArcSTE database, which adds in here. And then the aerial photo at the end of it is just stored on a different server. That comes over the top. So what we built here is a complete map based on several different data sources. And I think your screens should have caught up by now. Everyone knows this is possible. We've all seen demonstrations of it. The concern in the past has been that it's been a bit inaccessible, a bit difficult to use. So what I want to do is this. Let's go back to our drawing. Now initially I went to File, New, and I went to my map import function to import my SDF file as AutoCAD entities. This time what I'm going to do is go to my tool space here, and I'm going to go to my Windows Explorer. I'm going to find an SDF file here. So I've got parcels.sdf. All I'm going to do is drag that over my tool space. Now, I want to do this slowly to make sure that the screens keep pace. So I'll just drag this to my left hand side over the tool space, and when I let go, the information appears on my screen. Now if I save this drawing, actually let's do this. If I say drawing, save as, I'll put this in that same folder here. I call this saved file. What size is that? We save, and let's look at this folder, which was that one. This file is only 350k. That's nothing. The reason for that is that it's a link into the external data. This geometry is not an AutoCAD object. When I list, using my AutoCAD list command, it's a map bulk feature. So the whole purpose is that we are viewing an external data source, so if somebody changes it, it updates straight away for us. Now this is a huge leap forward for Autodesk, for Autodesk GIS in general. Now we can do a lot with this because of the fact that it's now stored externally. We're not limited by AutoCAD's restrictions. So let's look at some of this. On the left here is my parcels group. If I go to my table, I can see all my data. Same as before. The difference here is that when I click on one of these, so I'm just going to highlight number 6, my package zooms to that one for me. And that works for all of them. So you have a more interactive environment just to begin with. What you can also do is get some very funky labeling going on. So to control how this is displayed, I right click and I go to Edit Style. So on my Edit Style, I'll just do a few of these. I don't want to get too carried away and waste the whole session on it. I'll do a label here, and it will be, we'll say, the last sale price. And there's some options here for the font and the aesthetics, which I'll skip over. I'll press OK, and what we'll see on our screens are labels showing the sale price. Now I'm going to zoom around here a little bit. When you do this yourselves, you'll notice that the labels stay the same size. As you zoom in and out, they keep their magnifications. Now, let me just remove that. So I'll untick my create label. We'll come back to this in a second. And let me do something else. Let me go to the style. And let me change this from the green color to, we'll say, a grey color. So we'll press OK. That's very basic, very obvious. We've gone from green to grey, standard. Now we'll do something more interesting. I'm going to make a scale range. So what this means is that when I'm zoomed out, I don't want the text to appear. It'll get too cluttered. When I'm zoomed in, I want to see it. So I'll say a scale range of 0 to 900 and a scale range of 900 to infinity. So on 0 900, I want my label to appear for last sale. So we'll press OK for that. And on 900 to infinity, I don't want to see that. So now on our model space screen, there are now no labels. If I zoom way in, my labels will appear for me. And what I can also do is on my zoomed in view, I can say make a theme. So instead of showing it as grey on my zoomed in view, I want you to color code these parcels based off the last sale value. Now there's controls here for the aesthetics again. So we will say take this color code. We want you to go from red to yellow. And again, I'm glossing over this, that there's a lot more you can do with the aesthetics here. We've got 5 ranges. We press OK. And when we zoom in,
that's all right. I'm kind of monitoring on the side. I wanted to work it out.
So when we zoom in, we can see all this. Mute some of this. So as we zoom in, the colors show up. As we zoom back out, they disappear. So we're getting controls of the aesthetics based on the data. So it's a very friendly interface, and what I find from teaching it is that people with a background in GIS get quite excited about this. It seems quite intuitive to them. Let me just do one more very quickly. Let me go to the services. So this may be the wrong one, but we'll chuck it in. Sorry, that is the wrong file. Let me just do one thing here quickly. Let me close this and start from a different file. Now, what we can do here is the following. We can add a data resource twice. This is a bit strange, coming from an AutoCAD background, but I can pick my parcels resource. I can drag it in here, as I had previously. Then I can do it again. Now, you wonder, why would I do that? Let me just show you the reason. So I'll zoom in here, and I'll go to my first one. I'll edit my style by right-clicking, and I will change to I'll remove the fill. I'll keep the border. I'll make the border, we'll say, grey. That's just some aesthetic controls. What I'll now do is go to my second one, edit the style. In here, once again, I will remove the actual graphics. So I'll remove the fill and remove the border, and I'll turn on the feature label. So I'll say show me the label for the last sale price. We press OK to that. So what I've now got is 2 separate controls, one for the actual aesthetics of the boundary extents and one for the values of the parcels themselves. So I can turn them off using my panel on the left hand side. Now that can be tidied up further. If I go here, I can rename this to sale price, and I can call this, let's say, geometry. So you can see our map is becoming quite tidy. I can go to my, I can right click here and go to my group. So I'll right click and I've got new group, and I'll call this group, we'll say, lots. What I then do is drag my geometry in here and drag my sale price in here. So what I've now got is a little group on the left hand side where I can collapse and rebuild and globally turn on and globally turn off items based on that. So you can see this is starting to take shape and look like the standard GIS applications you've seen on the web before. So where we're going with this is that your AutoCAD Map, AutoCAD Civil tool can be used to author web pages with this data, which is again a huge jump forwards. So let me just do one more thing before we jump forwards. Again, I'm going to repeat the process. I'm going to go File, New. I'm going to pick my template. Now, this time I'm not going to drag and drop. Dragging and dropping is a nice simple way of doing it, which I like to show off a little bit on. I'm going to do it the other way, which is where I press Data and I press here Connect to Data. So when I do my connect, it's like going File, Open instead of double clicking a file on your desktop. But the difference here is that I can now see all the file types I can bring in. So I've been using SDF. We've also got Esri shapes. We've got various SQL servers. The raster one here is very interesting. If anyone's working with large ECW files, they will come in here a lot quicker than they come in through normal AutoCAD. It's also streamed a lot better. So these are basically the FDO providers. Now, working in support, we always get questions saying, can AutoCAD or AutoCAD Map import a certain format? And the FDOs make that question very easy to answer because they're open source. Let's just go back to PowerPoint here quickly. So the next slide here. Okay, first of all, this one explains that by using this FDO toolset, you're avoiding duplication. Basically, if you use the AutoCAD conversion method, you've got multiple copies of the same data. So the GIS guy's got one copy, AutoCAD guy's got a different copy, and someone else has got another copy. This way, everyone's using the same data set, so you avoid the confusion. Now, this slide here, just coming up, lists the various FDO files. Now, this is an old slide that's been more added since, like a Small World, for example. But the important point here is that the providers you see on the left-hand side, these are the ones that come natively with the software, and they're supported by Autodesk. The orange ones on the right-hand side, these are open source. So the OGR, for example, that imports map info. So we get asked a lot, can we do map info? So by using OGR, you can. Now we're investigating how effective that is and whether you can rewrite and that kind of stuff, but they do come in. The GDAL has got a bunch of raster formats. We come across some obscure ones, some strange things we've never heard of. They're usually listed on the GDAL. If your company uses FME, that gives you hundreds of data sources. The FDO links into that directly. So the point is that as well as being very funky and very pleasant to use, the FDO opens up a whole bunch of new formats that we didn't have access to previously. So we can do a lot more, but we'll skip it and we'll talk about Mapguide. Now, let's just try to explain what Mapguide's all about. That's the wrong web page. 1 second. This one here. This is a Mapguide site. It's just coming up on your screens in a couple of seconds. Essentially, it's a web browser looking at some data. Now what you'll notice is up here on the top right hand side, I have groups. Now these are the same groups I built earlier in my AutoCAD map session, or the same philosophy. The reason I was doing that was to lead towards this. What you'll also notice is that as I zoom in, so let me zoom in here a little bit, extra information appears on my screen. So I can now see my road outlines and some parcels. Let me zoom in further, and I've got my individual boundaries and my text. So let's let the screen catch up a little bit here. So that is the exact same philosophy, having the scale ranges that we've now put into the AutoCAD map functionality. So that is the finished product. We've all seen this before. The question is, what exactly is Mapguide? So one nice way to explain it is with this PowerPoint slide right here. It's just coming up. Essentially, you've got a bunch of data sources here. These can be map info files, they can be Esri shape files, they can be AutoCAD files, they can be anything. Usually you have to have some software to view them. So what we had previously was that this information was being seen in AutoCAD Map or AutoCAD Civil, which is great for the draftees, but the management team can't view that. So what this diagram represents is that in your office you've got guys with Google Earth, guys with web browsers, guys with everything else, and they want access to the data. So Mapguide sits on the server and it acts as a bridging device. So this data is now available to people who don't have AutoCAD. So what we're seeing here on my web browser from my previous slide, sorry, wrong web browser again, one sec. So on this browser here, what we're seeing is a Mapguide view. So there's a server sitting in the background which is providing this data to me. Now, all I've got here is a web browser. You don't have to have any other software installed, and it gives you the data access. So the question is, how feasible is it to set up something like this yourself? Or what's involved in it, or how complex can it go? So just to show some of the concepts of this, let's go and do some examples. So in here I've got Mapguide Studio. Now Studio is essentially a wizard-based editing tool to help you alter your maps for your final view. Now again, we are going to ask the question at the end of the session whether you want a dedicated session on Mapguide. So you're going to see quite a bit of information here. Essentially, let's just put this in context. On my web page, let me just switch back again very quickly. So on this web page here, on the top right, I've got these groups. I've got base map, municipal, and transportation. Now, at some stage, a decision was made on how these are going to be named, whether they'd be expanded or not expanded, and what will be displayed on my default view. So in my Mapguide Studio, that's where the functionality happens. So what I've got here is the exact same things: base map, municipal, and transportation. So I'm going to go to transportation here, and I'm going to change the label to transportation shown. And I'm going to tick on this box for group is initially expanded in the legend. So when I press save, that's saved back to my resource. So if I go back to my web page, if I press F5 to refresh that, so the default view that somebody now gets is transportation shown, which you can see, and I'm just highlighting it right now in the top right, and it's expanded out for me. Now that's a very simplified example of it. It can go a lot more detailed than that. What we can also do is, let's go back into Studio quickly here. We can go to the actual web page itself, and we can say, so we go to our flexible layouts and maroon. So we can tell the software that when I right click, I want certain functionalities to show up. Now you can see there's quite a bit in here, but it's giving you access to absolutely everything on the web page. Now I'm not a web designer, but by using this I can actually achieve a web page quite easily. So on my final web page here, when I right click, these options show up for me. So give me 1 second for this to catch up. You can see that when I right click, I've got zoom in, zoom out, zoom rectangle. If you decide you don't want these, it's not a big deal to change it. All you have to do is go back into Mapguide Studio and, for example, zoom rectangle here. Let's just take that and remove it. So your screen should have caught up by now. I've highlighted zoom rectangle, and I'm going to press my remove item button, and I will save. So now when I go back into my Mapguide Studio, I'll press F5 again to refresh. This will just take a few seconds. And now when I right click, our zoom rectangle is still here, so it's my caching. Okay, I have to restart my service. But zoom rectangle will disappear based on that process. So Mapguide is where you show the data to people who don't have software, and Mapguide Studio is where you use a wizard to control how it looks. Now I'm only glossing over it. There's a lot more to Mapguide. Essentially, it's based on, I showed as data, layers, map, and web. Now, I'm not going to go into it in detail, but that's essentially what it comes down to. Now, one option that you have is this. In your AutoCAD session, so let's just go back to our previous one here. If I close this, I have. Let me quickly bring in my FDO. So I'll pick my parcels.fdo here. I'll actually bring it in twice. I'll repeat what we had earlier. So bring it in a second time. And on my second one, I'm going to make the style for text only. And what I'm going to do is publish this to the web from my AutoCAD map interface. So, okay, I'm going through this pretty quickly. I think your screens are keeping up. I'm going to go here to my last sale price, say OK to that, and OK here. So my sales are showing up. I'll very quickly make a group. I'll call this group Webcast, and I'll just drag these two in here. I'll just take off the hatching here in case it goes in too far in front. So we'll take off the fill pattern and make the border quite thick and make it red. There we go, that's good. So we'll press OK to that, and one last thing, I'll call this view here text. Okay, that's enough. What I now do is go to my tools, and I've got a button called Publish to Mapguide in here. So when I press this, it asks me where's my Mapguides stored. Now mine, I'm going to copy and paste it because I'm lazy. So we will explain this in more detail on the full Mapguide webcast. But essentially, your Mapguide sits on a server. Now in my case, it's on my own computer, so it's called localhost. Usually it'll be a server in your IT department. So my site is called localhost Mapguide 2009. It asks me for a password. I'll press OK to that. Oh, okay. I must install Mapguide 2010 to do this. I've only got 2009 installed. Essentially what happens here is that the information I've authored here gets published into the Mapguide view for me in one hit. I can then use Studio to refine it further. So you got the option of using either one. So look, we will do a session on this in detail. We have to skip it for now. We're going to get close to the end of the hour pretty soon anyway. So that's Mapguide in a real charging down nutshell. Now, there's a very good example of how this works. So what we're going to do very quickly is show some geometry in an AutoCAD view here and show the same geometry in a Mapguide view. And we're going to illustrate that they are the same information, because in AutoCAD, when I make a change like that, so just drawing a silly triangle here, that will be updated back into my SQL Express database, and it will then appear in my web view as well. So let me just do this really quickly. So inside here, now just let me arrange some screens here, and then I'll pause for everyone to catch up, because I'm going to move a bit quickly for a while. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my AutoCAD view on the left hand side, and I'm putting my web view on the right hand side. I'm going to just do a bit of zooming here. I didn't realize my Outlook was open the whole time. Just closed it. Okay, now your screen should be starting to catch up here, hopefully. What I'm going to do now is zoom in to my Mapguide view. So what you're seeing is essentially the same geometry on the left hand side of the screen and the right hand side of the screen. So what you have to imagine here is that the left hand side is the AutoCAD person who's got AutoCAD Civil, AutoCAD Map, and he's viewing his data. The right hand side view is a web browser. So this is your manager who's got no drafting software of any kind installed. So what I'm going to do here is, as the AutoCAD guy, I'm going to pick a feature. So I'm going to pick this one here, this kind of jutting out peninsula square thing. I'm going to grab it, I'm going to drag it way out to make it really stand out like this for me. So there's no doubt we've made a big change here. We've got a bunch of pointy peninsulas happening. So now, having done this, I'm going to right click and select check in. So that has now checked that back into my database. Now what I do on my map view, so I'm now back to being a manager person who's got no AutoCAD installed. I'm going to press the pan button up here. I'm going to pan my view slightly to refresh it, and you will see that the geometry on that right hand side has adjusted. So let me just check if your screens have caught up here. Now on my screen it's instant, but I think that there's a lot of activity on this, so it might take a few minutes to catch it up. But that is giving you the illustration of both packages using the same data source. So that's got all kinds of powerful connotations. Again, we could go about this for hours and hours, but we've only got a limited time. What we're seeing here effectively is what I was drawing a while ago. I make a change, let me just clear this and do it again. So pointer options, erase all ink on slide. So I've made a change on my AutoCAD view here. That change is reflected into my data source and it shows up on my web browser. Now there's a lot we can do with that. What we like about this is that we've got a mobile solution. So essentially what we do is we build applications for handheld devices. These update the data source, and then either AutoCAD or Mapguide can view that information. Now, I'm just going to very quickly show you what I mean by this. So I've got our application open. This is called On-Site Connect. It's been developed by AC Systems. Let me just find it here. So what we've got here is essentially a wizard-like view to define forms. So what you're seeing here is one footing services. So I can go here and say my service type is a telco, my service type is a sewer, and the name of the person who picked it up is Jason, or whatever name you want to do. It can be any list you want. We put in John Howard here recently just to show how versatile he is. Now, all this stuff is done very easily. You add a control, so you can say add date time, for example. So I add that. It shows up here. Once it shows up, I can change the name. So I change it from control 67 to date. I can also control the aesthetics and everything else. That's now on my form, and I can pick this and do whatever I need to do with it. There's a bunch of other things you can do here as well. You can do audio, you can do image, GPS, all the usual things you expect to do on a handheld device. So what this is for essentially is inspections, or just taking data to the field or bringing data from the field. I always show services in manholes because I've spent years doing that kind of stuff, but people have used it for inspections of houses, for everything else. So we won't go into this in detail, but I did start to do one just to show an example for the webcast. So if I was to do my form, so at the end of this webcast I want to ask everyone the question of what do we show next week on a new one. So what I could do here is add a control called control 28. Let me just change that to I'll call it next webcast, which shows up here. Now what I want to do is give you options. So I go to my linked form and I go to my data grid. So I'll say the first option is Mapguide. The second option is going to be say FDOs in general, and the next one is going to be mobile, for example. So I do these, I press save, When I go back to my main form and go to my pull down list, I've now got FDO, Mapguide and mobile. So from here, all I will do is press my publish button. That gets published to my handheld device, and I can then go to the field, update and synchronize back to various devices. So in a very, very quick nutshell, that's what the On-Site Connect solution is all about. Now what we have found is that the On-Site Connect adds a lot to the overall process. Just having the web browser and the AutoCAD map by itself doesn't necessarily motivate people to get involved in it, whereas having the handheld solution completes the circle and it's gotten a lot more traction. So, one last thing to mention before we wrap up here is this geospatial value chain. Now, when I first heard this word, the word value kind of threw me off a little bit. I thought it was to do with how much money we can get from a customer. What the value actually represents, how much value a user of the software is getting from the GIS. So most people from the civil engineering side of things are storing information as AutoCAD drawings, and it's not being used to its full potential. So the first jump is what we had earlier, where you add attributes to your drawings, which is not that difficult. It's just a question of getting it started, and then it can be used afterwards. The next jump is where you go to FDOs. So your data is stored outside your drawing, and it can be accessed by more people, which is great. It's a huge jump forwards. If you want to go a step further again, you can store your store your information in a spatial database. This means essentially more people can access it. The FDO is a flat file. If it's a simple map info file, for example, it won't handle access by 100 people. And the last step is where you go to true spatial databases, where you have linking to financial systems and all kinds of crazy stuff. So what this is really is a means of gauging where you are and deciding where you want to be. Now we are in the process of putting this onto our website. So this is a kind of a preview of it. It'll be up later on today. When you go to Solutions Geospatial, you'll see a little summary of where each one is at. So from there you can basically remind yourself of what's been going on.